Well, hey there, Chase Oaks. My name's Greg. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and I'm so glad we get to be together this weekend as we start a brand new series called Born to be Wild. But before we jump in, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who's joining us this weekend, all of our campuses, our Sloan Creek campus, our 544 campus, our Espanol campus, everybody who's joining us online, everybody who's right here with me at our Legacy campus. I'm so glad we get to be together this weekend as we talk about this big, wild, crazy, scary, abundant life that God calls us to that seems to be a little bit of a disconnect from many of us on a typical Tuesday, when we're just sort of doing our thing and living our life. I wonder how many of us just wonder if we're kind of missing something. I think a lot of us would love to give ourselves to something bigger than ourselves, would love to make a difference in the world and experience that abundant life. And we just wonder, how come maybe those opportunities don't seem to come our way? And I think no doubt some of us have probably given up hope of ever really experiencing that. Maybe we just feel like we don't have that much to offer, or maybe we just feel like we've made too many mistakes, we just blown it too much. For whatever reason, either because of our own decisions or because of our own inadequacy or just because it just seems like God gives a cooler life to other people than to us, for whatever reason, it's not uncommon to feel like we're not exactly the all-stars on God's team. As I was thinking about this series and about this message, I was drawn to a website I thought about a website that's actually been around for quite a while. Despair.com calls itself a cure for hope, which is kind of funny. And they make demotivator posters. And if you're familiar, you've probably seen them before, and if you haven't, you've certainly seen motivational posters where, it'll be an eagle flying over a mountaintop and some encouraging, statement about courage or something like that. But in contrast to that, Despair.com makes posters like this. So this is a sinking ship, and it says, mistakes. It could be that the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning for others. It'd be good to have on your wall, don't you think? Here's a great one for your office. Teams, together we can do the work of one. Here's another great one for your office. It says, get to work. You aren't being paid to believe in the power of your dreams. It's encouraging, don't you think? This is one of my favorites. It says, ambition, the journey of 1,000 miles sometimes ends very, very badly. Perhaps my favorite, though, is one that I've seen years ago that they published. And instead of focusing the camera on the winner of the race, leaning across the tape, it focuses the camera on the whole bunch of runners that's sort of there at the back. And it just says, defeat, for every winner, there are dozens of losers. Odds are you're one of them. Here at Chase Oaks, we can be honest with each other. We're not all that. We're not all often the winner. We can embrace our inner loser, and we can encourage each other, right? In fact, I just want us to encourage each other just a minute. Turn to someone next to you and just tell them, God loves losers like you. Just do it right now. Just tell them. Yeah, bless their heart, right? Bless their heart. It is easy when we look at the Bible for our attention to be drawn to the all-stars. David, the king of Israel. Moses takes God's people out of bondage and captivity in Egypt. Paul, instrumental in establishing the New Testament church. John the Baptist, set aside for a special ministry while he was still in utero. Goodness. I compare that to my own life and think, well, no, not so much. So in this series, we're going to be looking at other types of biblical characters, people that are very much like us. And we're going to be looking at people that were pretty obscure, some of whom you've probably never even heard of. We're going to be looking at people who either because of their age or because of their lack of resources or because of their lack of social standing, never really felt like they had that much to offer. We're going to be looking at people who just blown it so bad that it would be easy to assume that God just doesn't use people like that. And what we're going to see is that God is always faithful to them and to us. And oftentimes, those are the very people that are God's first choice to do something great in the world. And I'm just encouraged and I'm excited about this series because I think if we all stick with us here for the next 5 weeks, that every one of us is going to see ourselves somewhere in one of these stories. And we're going to be encouraged and we're going to be inspired and we're going to be challenged to keep our eyes open to what God might be calling us to. So I want to jump in. We've got a lot to cover. Today, we're going to be in the Old Testament book of 1 Kings. So if you brought your Bible, if you brought a Bible with you, you can turn to the table of contents to find that. It's in the Old Testament. We're going to be in 1 Kings 17. And before we read, though, I want to kind of set the stage and kind of talk about what's going on historically and introduce ourselves to the characters. The main character in this part of 1 Kings is a guy named Elijah. And Elijah's a prophet, which just means he's a spokesperson for God. And what's going on historically is that Israel, God's chosen people, had wandered far from God to the point that many in Israel were now worshiping a false god named Baal. And Baal was supposedly a god of rain and harvest that many of the surrounding nations were worshiping. And now many within Israel were also involved in Baal worship. And one of the key champions of Baal worship was the current king of Israel, a bad guy named Ahab, who was married to a very unpleasant woman named Jezebel. And because of Israel's rebellion and worshiping Baal, God had sent a drought to the land, which is telling because Baal is supposedly the god of rain. God sends a drought in the land. And by the time we're going to pick up the story, the drought has already been going on for about a year. And Ahab and Jezebel have no idea why this is going on. They're no doubt, doing everything they can to appease Baal, but nothing is happening. And then Elijah comes on the scene. And Elijah gains audience with Ahab, and he tells him Baal is a false god, and because of Israel's rebellion and turning away from him, God, the one true God, is the one who sent the drought. And oh, by the way, this drought is nowhere near over, and also, by the way, it's not going to rain again until I say so, and then he just walks out. And then God says, okay, Elijah, now you got to hide. Because Ahab and Jezebel are very bad people. And so he sends Elijah to a ravine where he just sort of camps out for a little bit. There's a freshwater brook there, and God miraculously provides food for him until the brook dries up because of the drought. And then God says, okay, now I want you to go to a little town called Zarephath, which is in a region called Sidon, outside of Israel. And he says, there, a widow is going to take care of your needs. And so that's where we want to pick up the story in 1 Kings 17, verse 10. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? As she was going to get it, he called, and bring me please a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son that we may eat it and die. Sounds a little melodramatic, but we are given no indication in the text that she is exaggerating at all. This is a destitute woman who absolutely has nothing. She, like so many in our world, lives right on the edge of subsistence to the point that any type of calamity or hardship that befalls them or her, such as a drought, and their lives are in danger. This drought has been going on for a year. She has been struggling for a year. She no doubt already looks emaciated. She has already resigned herself that this is the very, very end, and she is preparing to eat the very last meal that her and her son are going to eat. These are desperate, desperate times for her. Let's continue reading. Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and for your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. So Elijah lived with her for about 2 years until the drought ended. So every day for 2 years, God provided enough food for the woman and for her son and for Elijah. And then as the story continues, or during that time, there's a dramatic scene where God intervenes for her in a pretty amazing way. Her son falls ill and dies, and then God brings him back to life and provides for her. So it was a wild ride for her. And she experienced God's provision, not just in daily sustenance, but also in the protection of her son. She found herself right in the middle of what God was doing in the world, in this epic battle of good versus evil. And in her life, she was used to make a difference. And even though her circumstances were dire, and I hope I never have to experience even 1/100th of what she had to go through, in the end, she did experience what many of us want to experience. I want to experience the provision of God. And I want to see his power on display. And I want to be part of what God is doing in the world. And I want to make a difference. And if that is the kind of big, full, wild, amazing, awesome life that we're wanting, there is something, if that's our desire, there's something crucial that we can learn from the widow of Zarephath. And it all centers around this really strange request that Elijah makes of her when they first meet. Let's read it again. It's in verse 13. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son." That is a very strange request to make of someone in her circumstance, don't you think? I mean, doesn't it sound just incredibly selfish? As I was thinking about that question and kind of pondering it, I decided to do a little bit of an experiment this last week, and it involved my wife. My wife, for the last 2.5 years, has been working full-time and also going to school full-time to get her graduate degree. And so, as you might imagine, it has just been beyond exhausting for her. And she walked in a graduation ceremony in May, but she still had a couple more classes to finish this summer, but she is almost done. In 2 weeks, she'll take her last final, and then she will be done, and I'm so proud of her. Yeah, it's great. But as you can imagine, full-time work, full-time school, it has made for very full weekends as she has just been studying and trying to catch up on things. It's made for very long days as she goes directly from work to evening classes. A lot of days of having to pack both a lunch and a dinner, and then when she comes home, she is like so loaded down with stuff. She has all this stuff she has to carry with her work, and then she has all of these books and notebooks and all this kind of stuff. She comes in the door, she's got stuff in her arms, she's got a heavy bag on each shoulder. She looks like she's training to be a Sherpa, for an Everest expedition or something. And she comes in, and it's just long days, and she's exhausted. And so the plan was that on Tuesdays are typically very long days for her, 12, 13-hour days for her. And so on Tuesday, I knew that she usually comes in late, and she has all of her stuff, and it's just been such a long day, and she's exhausted, and she comes into her desk, and she sets down her stuff, and she sets down the heavy bag off this shoulder, and the plan was that I'd just be sitting on the couch watching TV when she came in, and I would say something like, "Hey, honey, I hope you had a great day. Hey, while you're up, would you mind taking care of the dishes?" You might see where this is going. So Tuesday came, and it was working according to plan. She came in as typical. It was a very long day. She was exhausted. She was kind of bent. She was carrying all this stuff, and she came in. She set her stuff down. I'm sitting over on the couch watching a movie with my daughter, and it's my time, and I'm just like, my mouth goes dry, I start to sweat, like no kidding. I start to sweat, and I'm just telling myself, it's just an experiment. Just say it. You need it for your sermon, and I couldn't do it. I completely chickened out. I couldn't do it. My wife is so gracious and she is kind, but I tell you, that just would not have gone well. It would not have gone well. After such a long day for me that wouldn't have worked. Can you think about what he is asking her? I can see that you are destitute. I can see that you have come to the very, very end. But I'm kind of hungry. Would you make something for me first? Now, had she protested and said, "Sir, are you making fun of me? Me, a destitute woman with a child to feed, and you ask me for food?" Or had she responded in scorn and just said, "Sir, what kind of man are you to take food out of my mouth and that of my starving child?" Had she responded like that, we certainly would have understood, right? We would have understood. But Elijah is not being mean and he's not being selfish. He is a spokesperson for God, and he is giving her the opportunity to demonstrate open-handed faith. I think that this quality is a key ingredient, and in many of our stories, a missing ingredient in our journey with God. It certainly seems like it should have played out differently in that interaction with Elijah and the widow. It certainly seems like what should have happened is he would come up to her and say, "Here's the deal. God's got you covered. And in fact, if you were to go back to your home now, you will find your bins overflowing with flour and the oil the jars of oil overflowing with oil, because God has now provided more than what you need, more than enough for you and for your son. And since you have enough to share, would you please make a loaf of bread for me also?" But that is not at all how this went down. God did not intervene with his provision and his enablement until after she demonstrated open-handed faith. Open-handed faith just means that I loosen my grip on the very things that I am most prone to just white knuckle, and hold on to for all that I'm worth, and hold on to for my security and for my hope and for my provision. And in this story, it has to do with food. But there's all kinds of things that we hold on to like that, right? I mean, open-handed faith could mean I loosen my grip a little bit on my calendar and my schedule, because God might have other things for me. So I'm going to hold my schedule loosely, and I'm going to expect to be interrupted. Or open-handed faith could mean I'm going to loosen my grip on my goals and my aspirations, because God might have something different for my future. Or it could mean I'm going to loosen my grip on my opinions, which I hold so tightly, because I recognize that my ways are not God's ways. So I'm going to expect to continue to learn and to be corrected. Or, as is kind of demonstrated in this story, I'm going to loosen my grip on my material resources, because I recognize that God is the one who provides for me, and so in such, I'm just going to be willing to share with whoever has need, because God's the one who takes care of my family. We see this principle at play all throughout the Bible. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this story, that even though, Elijah's a pretty compelling, star player here in 1 Kings, and there's a lot of sermons been written about Elijah, a lot of things have been written about Elijah. I don't want to talk about Elijah. I want to talk about her, because she demonstrates something that appears all throughout the Bible. And I want to talk about her because if there's anyone who understands what it's like to feel forgotten and sidelined and just forgotten and sidelined, it's her. If there's anyone who knows what it's like to feel like they have nothing to offer, it's her. If there's anyone who wonders if God's ever going to answer her prayer, it's her. And I think that she represents so many of us, but then she demonstrates something that appears all throughout the Bible, and that is when we open ourselves to God, God does amazing things. This principle of open-handed faith, we see it at play. One great example is the Old Testament command of the offering of first fruits. In the Old Testament books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, God commands the farmers that in harvest season, he wants the first part of the crop, the first part of the harvest, to be brought before him as an offering, which is great, when you first hear it, until you start to think about it. Because as a farmer makes everything that they're going to make for the year, they make at the harvest. In fact, the farmer doesn't know how much they're going to make that year until after the harvest is complete. And while there's not a lot of farmers in Chase Oaks, it's not really farm country. I mean, we have a few, but we don't have a lot. We do have, that kind of level of financial uncertainty is not all that uncommon. It could be investment income, and you don't know how those investments are going to do. Or you don't know if those contracts are going to be there next year. Or you don't know, if you're a musician, you don't know if the gigs are going to be there. So it's not uncommon to say, I don't know how much I'm going to make until after I've made it. The farmer doesn't know how much they're going to have until after the harvest is complete. And what would seem like would make the most sense, if God wants a portion of the harvest, that the farmer would wait until the harvest is all done and he'd say, okay, this is how much I have. I can afford to give this much, and then that's how much I give. But in this particular offering, that's not what God commands. He says, no, when the farmer goes out, then the first couple of days of the harvest, that's what they're supposed to give. And the farmer has no idea how the rest of the harvest is going to be. I mean, a storm could come in, a hailstorm or whatever, and wipe out. That's the risk that they're taking. And the reason God commanded that had very little to do with the grain itself. I mean, it's not like God was hungry or was in need. It wasn't about the amount. It was about open-handed faith. Do I really believe that God is the one who takes care of me? And if so, I can be open-handed with the very thing that I am most prone to white knuckle and hold on with all of my might for my security and for my hope and for my provision and for my future and all of those things. God seems to zone in on the very things that compete for our trust, and he just pokes us right there. The Bible is clear, and Jesus in his teaching demonstrates that his understanding of us is clear, that in this life, when left to our own devices, we won't trust God. We might trust him for our future home, go to heaven when we die, that type of trust, which is relatively easy to trust. Like, what else are we going to trust in? I mean, we're going to be dead, But today, what am I trusting in today, for my hope, for my security, for my peace, those types of things? The Bible is very clear that we will not trust God for those things, but we will trust just about anything else. We'll trust our talents and our skills and our abilities. We'll trust other people. We'll trust our government. We'll trust our leaders. We'll trust false gods. The most universal thing that we will trust, regardless of our age or ethnicity or race or country of origin, regardless of any of those things, the most universal thing that human beings will trust is our material resources, the things that we own. Elijah tells the widow, God will take care of you. The flour's not going to run dry. The oil's not going to run out. Do you trust him? And her answer is, yes. Here. And God's response to that was not barnfuls of flour and barrelfuls of oil. It was just enough for that particular day. And so daily for 2 years, she proved to herself that a continual stance of sort of open-handedness and giving to those who was in need, in this case it was Elijah, did not leave her impoverished. And the principle is that when we give of ourselves, not just of our material resources, but when we give of our love and our compassion and our time, the things that we have to give, we will not be left impoverished. God comes in and replenishes us and makes sure that we have what we need. God takes care of us. One of the things that I see working in my own life, and this is just a little bit of a confession, is that despite God's abundant blessings in my life, despite the fact that God has come through for me again and again and again, and he has proven himself to be faithful, despite the fact that I have no reason to doubt his love for me or his willingness and his desire to take care of my needs. Despite all of those things, I nevertheless see within me a nagging tug towards scarcity thinking. And scarcity thinking or scarcity mindset operates under the assumption that anything good in this world or in this life is rare and it is hard to find and it is difficult to keep. And so you have to work for it, and you've got to clamor for it. And when you find something that is rare and good, you have to hold on to it with all of your might, and you've got to protect it, or else someone's going to take it from you. And it makes you live with a sense of panic and worry about the future. It makes you live with a sense of suspicion about other people. It makes you stingy to not give away those things that you're trying so hard to hold on to, and it makes us focus on the things that we don't have and the things that we want to add to our life. And the crazy thing is for someone like me to have even an inkling of scarcity mentality or scarcity thinking when I live a life of such abundance. And not just material abundance. I mean, I am certainly materially, I am taken care of. And when you look, I have more than I need. I have plenty to take care of my family and even share with others. But even beyond that, I have people in my life who I love, who love me. I've got a great church I can be a part of. It's just like in every area, I do not experience scarcity. Now, the widow of Zarephath, that's scarcity. What I experience and what many of us experience is what's called perceived scarcity. For even though we live lives of abundance, we live as though, and our mentality is as though, the things that we need are much more rare than they really are. Which means that we have a panic and a fear and a suspicion and a stinginess, all that kind of stuff, which is completely unwarranted, particularly for people who have experienced the rich and abundant, faithful blessings of God. Brené Brown, in her book, Daring Greatly, talks about our culture of perceived scarcity, and she calls it a culture of never enough. And this is what she says. We start off the morning thinking we didn't get enough sleep. Go through the day thinking we don't have enough time. We fall asleep thinking we failed to accomplish enough tasks. Whatever we have, do, or get, it's never enough. Perceived scarcity makes us go through our day as we're interacting with other people with this nagging reminder and painful reminder of what we don't have and what we're missing, whether it's money or smarts or looks or creativity or personality or whatever. Perceived scarcity makes us go through our day acting as if things like affirmation are in short supply and there's not enough to go around. Someone else gets praised, and as strange as it might sound, we get jealous as if there's not enough to go around. Someone else experiences financial blessing, and we get fearful as if there's not enough to go around. Someone else gets attention, and we get jealous. It's like, and it goes on, and we clamor for those things, and we work for those things, and we hold on to those things with all of our might, and we're fearful that we might someday lose those things, and we're stingy with those things, and I think God diagnoses that to say that at least at some level, it's because we're trusting in those things. We're trusting in them for our hope and for our security and for our identity and for our happiness and all of that. When it comes to things like that, when it comes to our time, which we can either give in service to others or just sort of keep for ourselves, or our money, or our other material resources, or even things like our compassion, which we can give or we can withhold, or our affection, which we can give or withhold, or our love, which we can give freely or withhold, or our mercy, which we can give freely or withhold, or our forgiveness. When it comes to those things, I think many of us are fearful that we might actually give more than we receive. And we just don't want to be on the losing end of any transaction, which just makes us self-protective, right? And I just wonder how many experiences, how many opportunities we miss out on because we go through our day just so closed. The dangers of scarcity thinking are clearly seen. There's been a lot written about this, not just within Christian circles. Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about the dangers of scarcity thinking. And in case you're wondering, at least according to Stephen Covey, highly effective people are not scarcity thinkers. If you were to go to YouTube and type out, scarcity mentality or scarcity thinking, you'll see motivational speakers talking about this. Author and speaker and business leader Michael Hyatt makes a list on his blog of what he feels are the character traits of scarcity thinkers. And look at what Michael Hyatt says. They believe that there will never be enough. They're stingy with their knowledge, contacts, and compassion. They default to suspicion and find it difficult to build rapport. They resent competition, believing it makes the pie smaller and them weaker. They're pessimistic about the future, believing that tough times are ahead. They think small, avoiding risk, and they are entitled and fearful. Not a good list. Not at all a good list. And the sad part about it are the number of opportunities that are missed because our minds are just sort of dwelled around that type of sort of protection and fearfulness and all of that. And the problem is, if we see ourselves on that list, if we see character traits like that within us, it is very difficult to talk ourselves out of it, right? I mean, have you ever tried to talk yourself out of feeling entitled or fearful? Not so easy. Now, the Bible diagnoses this, God would diagnose this as a trust issue, ultimately, that we feel this way because we're not trusting in him. But God doesn't just say, now believe more, or faith. I mean, he does say that. He wants us to increase our faith, but he also gives us something very, very concrete, something that we can incorporate into our own life, a discipline that we could start today. And we could work on, every day. And if we did this, if we utilize this very, very concrete thing that God gives to us, then we will slowly move step by step away from scarcity thinking into a life of more openness toward God and the opportunities that he gives and the big, wild, crazy, fun, awesome life that he has for us. And you want to know what that concrete thing is? It's called generosity. When we are generous, not just with our material resources and our money, but when we are generous with our life, with our love and with our compassion and with our time and with our energy and our focus and our mercy and our forgiveness, when we just give, we are loosening our grip on the very things that we are most prone to hold on to for my own sense of self-worth and security and hope and provision and all of those things. It's, like I mentioned just a minute ago, it's difficult to talk myself out of being fearful or entitled or any of that type of scarcity thinking. It's difficult to talk myself into feeling grateful all the time or being completely open to God. It's sometimes hard to control how I feel, but I can control how generous I'm going to be. I can absolutely control that. On how giving I'm going to be with how open I'm going to be in sharing my home or my vehicle or my money, or how giving and generous I'm going to be with my compassion and my mercy and my time and my forgiveness. I can control those things. A generous life says that instead of hoarding those things, I can afford to give more than I receive without worrying about being taken advantage of or being left depleted, because God is the one who's going to replenish me and make sure that I have what I need. And when we do that, when we experience that replenishment and when we experience God's provision in our life, the more and the more and the more open we're going to be. And the more opportunities we're going to see all around us to engage in what God is doing. I started off this talk asking and wondering if there might be something that some of us are missing day to day. And I do think that it is possible that we are missing opportunities to engage in what God is doing all around us because we're going through our day with our fists clenched. God has a big, crazy, wild, abundant life for us, and he is calling us to it. But when he does that, when he calls us to that larger life, he will challenge us, and he will stretch our faith by poking us and challenging the very things that we're most prone to hold on to. And that is just what he does. As I was preparing for this talk, I had to admit to myself that level of openness and generosity that's more aspirational for me than it is actual. In all honesty, I can be a real hoarder. Just guarding my time, guarding and protecting my resources, stingy with compassion, stingy with mercy and affection and love toward other people. But I recognize that the most joyful people I know are the people that just give. Not just their material resources, but they give of themselves. They give of their time. They give of their service. They give of their love. And they're just generous. And God just seems to open up opportunities for them. And God just seems to make sure that those people have what they need. And the people that I have in my mind that I know live like that, they just have these big, fun, wild, scary, abundant lives. And that's what we want, right? That's what we want. And some of us, and I put myself in this category, have a little ways to go in this, and that's okay. That's okay. We can journey together. I want to challenge us as we close here. I want to challenge us to do something this week, for us all to take a 1-week challenge, and that is to start each day with prayer. That's something that many of us already do, or at least try to maintain, but not just any prayer. I want to challenge us all to pray, to start each day with an open-handed prayer. And when I say open-handed, I want to be literal and just in a symbolic gesture to pray with our hands open like this each morning this week, in a symbolic gesture that we're loosening our grip of the things that we're most prone to just hold on to with all of our might. And list those things before him, just in all honesty. And it could be our money and our resources, or it could be our standing and success, or it could be our need for constant affirmation of others, or it could be whatever it might be. It could be our goals or our opinions or whatever it is. And just list those things and say, God, I invite you to interrupt my schedule. God, I invite you to change my opinions if they need to be, and teach me and help me grow. I invite your leadership into my future. I invite opportunities to share with others. Show me where you want me to share my resources. I invite opportunities to give more than I receive, give more love and compassion and mercy than I receive. And I trust that if I deplete myself, I am not going to remain depleted, because you're going to come through and you're going to replenish me and make sure I have what I need. That is a scary prayer. But I tell you what, if we want to experience that big, wild, abundant life that God has for us, that's the pathway. Let's do that this week and just see what God does. And then in just a minute, we're going to pray, and we're going to kind of do our own kind of open-handed prayer here in just a minute. And then at all of our campuses, we're going to sing one more worship song. And the reason I want to do that is just to remind us all that we don't just offer ourselves just simply out of obedience to God. We are doing this in response to a God who has already given us everything and already demonstrated that he is faithful and that he is powerful and that he loves us completely through the giving of his son on our behalf. And so we do this out of worship. We get to do this. As we offer more and more and more of ourselves to God, we're doing it to a God who has already given us everything. And so before we sing, I want us all to go to prayer right now. And if you would, just bow your heads and close your eyes and think about what are those things that we are just so prone to just hold on to with all of our might. Those things that might be competing for our trust. And I'm just going to ask, everyone's heads bowed and eyes are closed and people aren't looking around. I want you to ask, I want to ask of you, if you would, if you feel comfortable, to just unclench your fists right now and open your hands to God. And let's pray. Heavenly Father, it is yours. Our jobs, they're yours. Our resources are yours. Our relationships, our fears, our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations. Father, the things that we feel we cannot live without, Father, you are already desiring to provide for us. And we acknowledge before you that we spend an awful lot of time clamoring for and holding on to things that you want us to freely offer up to you and entrust that you will take care of us. And so we ask and we invite your interruption into our schedules. We invite your direction on where you'd like for us to share our resources. We invite correction into our opinion and direction for our future. All of those things, Father, it's all yours. It's yours. And I pray this week for each one of us that you would open up a new opportunity for us to engage in what you're doing all around us, and give us the strength to be faithful and to respond rightly with open-handed trust. And I pray this in Jesus' name.